While the last episode felt a bit like an epilogue rather than a beginning for a new arc, this episode feels like an actual beginning for the new arc, because we end up in Kitakami. And just like the games, the Rising Volt Tacklers take a bus to Masui Town and have the express intention of meeting Briar. Masui Town proper seems to be absolutely deserted. That is because everyone is at the Harvest Festival. Kitakami grows a lot of apples and they always want plentiful harvests. As a person who grows up in an area that has a lot of apples, I know the feeling. I think we actually do have an apple orchard harvest festival somewhere around here. Anyways, now that this is Kitakami, and a distaste for outsiders seems to be relatively omnipresent, this seems to fuel the theory that the story of Horizons takes place after the events of Scarlet and Violet's main campaign and the Teal Mask itself. Everyone seems to have the festival Jinbei on hand, and I doubt the Rising Volt Tacklers just keep this in the airship. I think the caretaker just sold this to them, because remember, in the games, you are given the festival Jinbei by Carmine and Kieran's grandparents. These look suspiciously mass-produced, and not because, well, the design is different from that of the games. I assume that the caretaker sold or gave this to them. No one's exactly looking suspicious at them in the festival, either. So, how much of Indigo Disc itself has changed because Teal Mask clearly has happened? That's up for debate. We know at least the way home probably happened since Arvin, Penny, and Nimona seemingly know each other. We can infer the Teal Mask happened. Indigo Disc, we'll see. And then my theory gets flushed down the drain when Carmine shows up and says she doesn't answer outsiders. Oh boy. Maybe she's just not on good terms with all outsiders. Maybe you just have that protagonist card that you keep around, and that makes you much better to Carmine in her eyes. And much like the games with Ogre ousting, she challenges Free to a bunch of carnival games. Meanwhile, Roy and Crocolore find the Synchro Machine. Sinclair will be so pissed to find out that someone just left it in the middle of nowhere in Kitakami, and she will also be pissed to find out it's only supposed to be used in the terrarium, and now it's being used out in the open in Kitakami. Oh boy. And you can tell this episode is one where the voice cast had fun. And of course, Crocolore freaks out and runs off while in Roy's body, and Roy runs off with some difficulty, mainly because he's not exactly 100% attuned to Crocolore's body shape. Meanwhile, apparently Crocolore can run around in Roy's body with no problem. Of course, their attempts to cover this up to Liko and Dot fail. Miserably. They are immediately found out. And of course, keeping with what happened in Ash's anime, Roy is able to talk as Crocolore in a comprehensible language just like Meowth. Gotta say, I have to love the expressions Roy puts on when using Crocolore's body. From here, we break off into a series of gags and small adventures. We get this interaction with Carmine slowly losing her sanity as Freed keeps beating her at various carnival games. One of them involves her ending up eating the paper they're using to make ripping art or something like that. Meanwhile, Roy as Crocolore discovers the concept of caramelization while with Murdoch. Frustrated at losing more and more carnival games, Carmine just challenges Freed to a battle and subsequently fulfills her role of getting beaten in battle by an outsider. So the kids help Molly, who are treating children's foot injuries because of the whole sandals bits. This girl becomes very relevant in a few minutes. So more gags, using Crocolore's flame with Orla to cook for a booth with a broken stove. This is the final adventure before Roy and Crocolore are able to swap back now that the guy managing the booth with the Synchro Machine manages to repair the Synchro Machine. Liko tries her hand to do the Synchro Machine swap bit, but it explodes. And they finally say the name of the Synchro Machine. So, when this is all said and done, Carmine stalks Freed to the community center and keeps demanding challenges. She reveals that Briar is her homeroom teacher and says they'll need special permission to go to the Kitakami Crystal Pool. The girl from earlier, Shizune, is actually the caretaker's daughter, and if you think this is just a case of, oh, they just made her up for the anime adaptation, no. They did not. She is actually his daughter in the games. You actually face her, and she actually mentions this fact in the battle right afterwards. And with that, they're off to the crystal pool. This episode is a nice, touching episode. Though someone should tell Shizune that she didn't fall for Roy. She fell for a Pokemon in a human's body, quite literally. This episode also accomplished a few things that I really enjoyed. Which one, we get a spotlight on the various Rising Volt tacklers. Freed, for example, gets into a feud with Carmine. Seeing Carmine slowly, well, it wasn't that slow, completely lose her mind at losing to Freed to the point that she's willing to eat a piece of artwork, it makes sense in context, is just delightful. Meanwhile, with Murdoch, this is where the caramelized apple bits comes from because he is the chef on the Rising Volt Tackler's Brave Olivine. Or honestly, Brave Asagi. Brave Olivine just sounds weird. So obviously, Murdoch's whole thing would be about food. Molly, as everyone says, is a rogue Nurse Joy, so of course she's dealing with medical things. Orla is the mechanic on the Brave Asagi, and therefore has to deal with helping some guy fix a broken stove. Also, why does the stir-fried noodles look so good in this episode? It's a fun episode where the plot doesn't really progress, but we show off a lot of the characters, and, well, it actually progresses at the end, so it's still a fun episode. In terms of Carmine being Carmine and how she seemingly still distrusts outsiders, you can read this a few ways. Either it's her tsundere personality shining through, she's still like this, she's just nicer to you and your friends in the games. Or you can think of this as Horizons doing its own thing and sort of just using Scarlet and Violet as a springboard for its own ideas. For those of you who are expecting Kieran to get at least mentioned in this or cameo in like a photograph, I'm sorry, he's not even in this episode. Carmine doesn't even mention him. The only other important Scarlet and Violet character that gets mentioned is Briar, and that's because Briar is plot relevant to the current story. But I am 100% sure that he'll eventually show up in a Blueberry Academy-based arc. I mean, they have to promote Blueberry Academy, right? I mean, that's only like the third thing they had to promote. They had to promote the main game, then they had to promote the Teal Mask, and then they had to promote the Indigo Disc. I'm not coping or anything, but in all seriousness, I do think he will end up in a Blueberry Academy-based arc, though what that arc must entail is up for debate. I don't know, maybe director Serrano decided to go build his school atop the ruins of Lakuya. I mean, that's at least would explain how nobody knows where it is. Or maybe he powers the school using Lakuyam. I guess we'll find out when we get there, but for now, we're going to go deal with the crystal lag machine that is the crystal pool. Those are just my thoughts. Please consider liking, subscribing, tipping the channel on Ko-fi. This is Cyril signing off.